Welcome to Managing Collections Work. In this course, we are going to discuss a number of topics, including processing disputes, creating payment promises, managing bankruptcy scenarios, setting up and using strategies, and lastly, setting up and using dunning. First, we are going to start by discussing the dispute process in the collections application. So what is a collections dispute? Really, we are looking at a situation where a customer is questioning the balance of a transaction. Now, that question might be about part of the balance, or the question might be about the full balance. Okay. Now, in terms of the processing flow, how collectors handle this scenario in the collections application. Well, the first thing they do is they navigate to the collections work area, and in the collections work area, of course, being a navigational component with multiple tabs and multiple regions, the place to go would be the transactions tab. There are other pages in there, other tabs, aging, profile, history, notes, and so on. But you would navigate to the transactions tab, because that is where you would be able to see a list of overdue transactions as well as specific details on those transactions. Then the collector would pick a specific dispute section, and so this indicates how that collector is going to handle that dispute. And of course, the collector will know how to handle the dispute based on the interaction with the customer. So it could be something like a line, subtotal, a percentage of a balance, can be a specific invoice line, or it might even involve a tax, a portion of the tax. So after picking that dispute, selecting that specific dispute section, then the collector will enter a reason. And that's going to be very, very important for reporting and tracking purposes, that you associate a reason with the dispute. The reason can be something like a discount. Okay, the customer was perhaps expecting a discount that he or she was promised. There are comments, attributes, or comment boxes that the collector can use to input details about that interaction with the customer. And then there's an additional comment box that will allow the collector to input internal comments. So there are two types of comment boxes in there, or fields. One where the collector can input information that he or she received from the customer, and another box where the collector can capture information that's meant to be viewed internally within the organization. Once these steps have been done, then what the collector will do is click on the submit button to submit the dispute. At this point, the credit memo request approval process is initiated, is launched. And so if the dispute is approved, then a credit memo will be created in the receivables module. So this credit memo request approval process uses workflow rules that are delivered and that we will discuss later on in the topic in more detail. And of course, those who receive the notification, the workflow notification, will have the ability to either approve or reject or request additional information. So that's a look at what a dispute is in the collections application and what the processing flow is. Of course, I will demo this functionality later on at the end of the topic, but that gives you some general steps that take place as part of this flow. So let's talk about configurations for dispute processing. The first thing that we want to take a look at are the collections preferences. Now, once we navigate to collections preferences, we're going to see that this configuration it breaks down into three areas. Global preferences, and then we're going to find correspondence settings, And then there's going to be a third section there for preferences that can be applicable to one or multiple business units. Let's go there and take a look. So I'm going to go to the functional setup manager. Here, what I want to do is click on the settings and actions menu and go to and select the setup and maintenance link. This is synonymous to functional setup managers. Functional setup manager being the application we use in the Oracle Cloud to complete setups. So here I'm going to pick the offering financials and looking for the functional area collections. And then on the right I see implementation tasks associated with the collections functional area. So I'm going to click on collections preferences. That will be the setup or configuration that we want to take a look at. Now here, of course, as I highlighted, there are three sections. Global preferences, these are applicable to the collections application as a whole. Then there's the preferences section, and what we see here are settings that are going to impact one or multiple business units. They can be business unit specific. Then we go to the correspondence section, and in here we see the two settings we saw in the PowerPoint. Whether or not to send a dispute notice, and of course here we have the yes or no options. The idea here is to notify the customer of disputes that have been made to their account. If you select yes to send the dispute notice, then of course you have to populate a dispute template, and there is a delivered template, the one that we see here. The dispute confirmation letter template is a BI publisher template that includes wording in it that you can use. Okay, so this is available for use. This template contains the information that the customer is going to see when they receive the notice, if you of course select yes for this setting. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Now one thing here that I would like to highlight in terms of the dispute process, and I'm going to backtrack to the previous slide for a second, is the fact that you have to enter a dispute reason. Again, and that will help with reporting and tracking. The dispute amount is going to default, based on the section that you select, and we have different options here: subtotal, tax, invoice lines, amounts or quantities can be updated, of course. But one thing to mention here is that amount and quantities cannot be greater than the current amount or quantity. So basically what that means is that when you're processing the dispute, if it's amount based or quantity based, whatever you input as a collector there cannot exceed the original amount or original quantity of the transaction. Right, so those are a couple of points there about the dispute process. Now we want to talk about additional settings here, additional configurations, and that will be the dispute reasons. So I'd like to fast forward to this slide. Now here we see, of course, the implementation task that you would need to navigate to if you wanted, if you had a requirement where you needed to add additional reasons so that they would be visible to a user, to a collector. So there are some predefined reasons there, but you can add to the list. Again, this is going to be very, very useful for reporting and tracking. And so let's go to the functional setup manager and take a look. Here what I'll do is hit cancel. And once I'm back here where I can see the collections functional area, I'm going to go ahead and select all tasks and search for the task that I'm interested in. So manage collections lookups. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to click on the link. And there is a specific lookup type that we want to use here for this search. So I'm going to go ahead and type that. So it's this one here, IEX underscore dispute underscore reasons. So I'm going to go ahead and search. And if I navigate down, of course, we can see here some of the sample dispute reasons that are going to be available to the collector, to the users of the collections application. So we have this one for receivables error, AR error, cancellation, credit and rebill, duplicated billing, free product, late payment, you know, the list goes on and on and on, right? So again, the idea would be to review what's there and of course add to the list to make sure that you meet business requirements. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and with that, we want to now continue discussing the credit memo request approval process. So we know that the collector can initiate the dispute in the collections work area. They will navigate to the transactions tab, pick the transaction in question, and start inputting relevant information in terms of, you know, they would select a section, is it a line, is it tax, and so on, and then would populate amount and or quantities. Now, once that collector hits the submit button, this is the workflow process that is launched, the credit memo request approval process. So what is this credit memo request approval process? It's basically a workflow process that is managed by the Approval Management Extensions Engine, AMX. AMX is part of the Human Workflow Services of Oracle Service-Oriented Architecture Suite. Now, the Human Workflow Service is basically responsible for handling interactions with users or groups that participate in the business process. And so it does that by creating and tracking tasks, you know, for those users in the organization. So we're talking here basically about a workflow process. Now, we do predefine rule sets. So the rule sets contain rules that are going to be executed once that credit memo request approval process is initiated. So there are two predefined rule sets for this credit memo workflow, the collection agent rule set and the non-collection agent rule set. So what does that mean? We are going to have users involved from a collections perspective and from a receivables perspective. So most likely there's going to be a collections manager who will approve or reject the request to create a credit memo, and provided that they approve, then there's going to be a second layer on the receivable side. A billing manager will have to approve. So those are the two predefined rule sets that that Oracle delivers. Now, of course, there is a requirement there. We do deliver the rule sets, but for each rule set, you do have to define approval groups. Those approval groups are going to contain those users who are going to be approving on the collection side and on the billing side in receivables. So we'll explore that in a moment, and we'll navigate to the BPM work list and show you around. Now, before we do that, we want to explain what this is, the BPM work list. This is the tool used to administer rules, just like the ones we see at the top. You know, there are going to be rules associated with these rule sets. But not only that, that is the tool that you will use to access a workflow task. Okay, so if I'm a collections manager and I get a notification, I can see that notification by navigating to the BPM work list. So I can see the task in front of me and I can act on that task assignment. And of course, that acting on that task assignment means that I'm going to have to approve, reject, request information, etc., etc. So we'll navigate there in a moment and show you where to define those two approval groups, one for collections, one for billing. That's what non-collection means here. So one approval group for the collections application, one for billing, which will be receivables. Now, one thing we would like to highlight as well in terms of configurations is that there is another receivables requirement that is important to discuss. And that requirement has to do with the receivables transaction types. You need to make sure that receivables transaction types are configured for dispute processing. What does that mean? You have to assign a credit memo type to transaction types associated with invoices, debit memos, chargebacks. That's another important requirement that needs to be taken care of. Okay, that way, when this credit memo request approval process is initiated and receivables attempts to create a credit memo, it will be able to do so. It will look at the invoice, it will look at the transaction type, and from there it'll know which credit memo type to use. So that's an important requirement there. Now let's navigate to the BPM work list, and I'm going to do that by going to the functional setup manager. So I'm in the functional setup manager. What I'll do is I'll click on this tasks icon here and select the option search, or the link search. And I'm looking for the task manage task configurations for financials. Okay, so I'm going to click on that task here, and that's going to take me to the BPM work list. Now, I'm here in the BPM work list. One more thing I want to do is I want to narrow down, run a search to see rules associated with financials. And so here I just run a search for FIN asterisk and then click on this button. Now once I clicked on this button, then I can see rule sets. I can get to those rule sets from here by selecting the task. So I'm gonna go with this one here, credit memo approval. And that's the workflow task that is relevant in this case. So after I select the task, then I'm gonna go to rules. And from the rules, notice here that there is this collection agent workflow and non-collection agent workflow. So I'm going to go to collections agent workflow. That's going to take me to the predefined rule set, for the collections application. So that means that that rule is supposed to route a notification to a collections manager or a collection supervisor so that they can act upon it and decide to approve or reject. So I'm going to click on that link, and then here we can see a number of rules. Okay. Now, of course, if you expand the rule, you can see additional details about the rule. This one is has a parameter for amount of 50, for example, and then, of course, rules are going to have conditions. So there's an if statement here. And then there's the then statement, which indicates what will happen if the criteria is met. Okay. Now here, notice that there is an approval group attribute or field, and that's pointing to an approval group that will, in turn, point to a user, or users, can be more than one users, that will be responsible for approving the credit memo. Right, so what I would like to do now is click on this button, top of the page, or over to the right, this approval groups button. I'm now in task configuration. I'm going to click on approval groups. And if I expand this, we can see a number of approval groups. There's the billing manager approval group for the business unit US1. And we can see that the user, Tracy Allen, is part of that approval group. Again, an approval group does not have to have one user, can have multiple users. This one happens to have only one user. So this will be the person responsible for the approval of the credit memo on the billing side. Okay, if I continue looking, looks like some of these approval groups are business unit specific. This one here is the collection manager approval group for the business unit US1. This one has one person. The approval group contains one person, and that would be Sharon Colby. She will be the person assigned to approve the credit memo request on the collections side. So that gives you a little bit of an understanding and a look at the BPM work list and how to navigate. So I'd like to return to the presentation now. Right, so now we would like to highlight the instructor demo. So I'm going to be doing a demo of the dispute feature in a moment, the dispute functionality, and that will include creating a dispute in the collections work area. Performing the workflow approvals. So you're going to see me logging in as a user, the collections user, then logging out, coming in as the billing user to approve the credit memo request, and then reviewing the credit memo that will be created as a result of this workflow process. Everything though starts with a dispute, and once approved, that dispute then is, the information in the dispute is used to create a credit memo. So what I'll do now is I will navigate to the software. So, and what I want to make sure that I'm logged in as a collections, as a collector, a collections end user, and I am. So here, what I want to do is show you how to navigate to the collections work area from the home page. I was already sitting there, but I'm backtracking to the home page. So from the home page, I'm Jim Jones, a collector. I'm going to click on collections, and then here's the collections icon. Now, what I want to do next is, of course, from this landing page that shows me delinquent customers, payment promises, strategy tasks, etc. I can navigate and locate the customer that I want to view information about. So if I move towards the middle of the page, then I can see a list of customers. So at the top we see the info tiles that they allow me to focus on certain things like promises and certain activities that may be assigned to me. But I'm going to navigate towards the middle here and pick Easy Solutions. So by clicking on the hyperlink, it takes me here, right, where I can see in this portion of the collections work area multiple tabs. There's the profile tab that gives me general information about the customer. There's the transactions tab, and that will show me very specific transaction information. I can search using date ranges. And then, of course, there's the agent tab and other tabs such as history that shows me donning letters that have been sent to the customer, etc. So I'm going to stay here in the transactions tab. And what I want to do is run a search here. Maybe I can update the start date so that I can see more transactions. I'm going to be able to find here overdue transactions. So I'm going to go and use this range 1/1/2015 to 4/14/2019. And then I'm going to execute the search by clicking on this arrow at the end. As you can see here, the search can be business unit specific, but it doesn't have to be. Right? So it looks like even when I expanded the search, there are only a few transactions that are overdue. So I'm going to pick the second one here, this invoice 26765. Right? Notice the buttons at the top. So the one that I want to pick is dispute, but there are other options for collectors such as adjust, promise, preview, preview the invoice, create a payment promise, process an adjustment or even process a payment, but I'm going to go with dispute. Now here you can see the section, and this is something that I as a collector have to decide what would be the best option here. And of course this will depend on the feedback that I have received from the customer. Is it a specific invoice line that's being disputed, or is it just a portion of the total balance and so on? So I'm going to go with specific invoice line and say that maybe there is a dispute based on this line here for 3658. So I'm going to put in dispute amount. So I'm going to make it 500. Of course, I have the ability also to input quantities if I wanted to. Then notice here that the dispute reason is mandatory. Okay, so you can add to the list by navigating to the functional setup manager. We discussed the implementation task that you would have to navigate to. That would be the manage collections lookups. So here I'm going to go with this one, discount. Maybe the customer was expecting a discount. Okay, and here we see two comment boxes as we highlighted, one for internal comments, one for customer comments. So here I'm going to say customer expecting a discount that was promised. Okay, I can also input internal comments. Now here I'm going to click on submit, and this is when the credit memo workflow is going to be initiated. Now notice there is a dispute request number that's assigned to this dispute 1005, and I can also see that dispute number if I click on this notes icon here. I'm going to click on that, and here I can see 1005, the dispute number and the dispute amount, or the credit memo request number, that which is the same as the dispute number 1005. So I'm going to click OK here, and for now I'm going to click on done. But the next step would be to log in as the collections user that's supposed to look at this request and approve or reject. So what I'll do here is I'll open a new browser tab. And so I'm going to go in as this user, Sharon Colby, and she's one of those, she's part of that approval group that we saw earlier. Again, an approval group can contain more than one user. That approval group happens to have only one user. So now how do I get to the BPM worklist? I'm going to click on the bell icon towards the top portion of the screen, to the right, the top right portion of the screen. And here I can see credit memo request approval 1005 for Easy Solutions. So I can click on the link if I wanted to see more details. And of course I see details about who the collector is, the business unit, the customer. I can see information about the transaction, the line being disputed here, and the dispute amount, which is at the line level, and the comments as well, that the customer is expecting a discount that they were promised. Now here, what I'll do is I'll click on approve, but of course there's the option to reject and other actions here to request more information or reassign to someone else. So I'm going to go ahead and approve. Okay. Now, what is the second layer here? That will be the billing user approving as well. So I'm going to go in as the billing user, Tracy Allen. And I'm going to go back to that bell icon in the top right corner of the page. Here's the credit memo request approval 1005 for Easy Solutions. And again, I'm going to click on it. And of course, the same details that were available to the collections user are going to be available to the billing user. except that the billing user can also see that the flow here and the fact that the previous user approved. So I'm going to go ahead and approve as well. So there's one more thing we want to do here, and that will be to review the credit memo. Since both approvals were successful, we want to navigate to receivables and the billing work area so that we can take a look. So from the billing work area, I'm going to click on tasks and manage transactions. And from here, I'm going to look for transactions for these customer easy solutions. Now, of course, I can input a date in here if I want to narrow down the search and find that credit memo. Now here we can see the credit memo, and of course we can see it is for $500, which was the amount of the dispute. So I'm going to click on the transaction number link, and here we see the credit memo. All right, so let me return to the PowerPoint. So we've gone through a number of topics. We have described what disputes are in the collections application, configurations that are relevant to this feature, to the dispute feature, the preferences, particularly those settings that have to do with whether or not to generate a notice that the customer will receive to let them know what are the disputes that have been processed, for their account. We have seen also that there are dispute reasons you can add to the list so that users can pick those reasons for tracking and reporting purposes. And also we have talked about the credit memo request workflow and how we deliver rules for that workflow, and the fact that you have to define approval groups for collections and receivables, in other words, billing. Then we demonstrated creating a dispute and performing the approvals all the way to reviewing the credit memo. And so with this, we conclude the topic, processing disputes. And now let's take a break, and then we'll continue with the next topic.